Welcome back to the Mountain Morning Show. Yesterday, I should say, one of my friends described it as banana town when it comes to the economy, and I felt that a little bit too, and thought, you know what, it's time to bring in an economist, which is why Rick Haskell is here, associate professor from Westminster College in the finance department. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to be back with you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I think we need to have you here a little bit because, as I was telling the other people yesterday, I'm like, just stay calm. Don't sell anything just yet. In fact, maybe buy some stuff.
Right.
But even with that, I think there was a lot of nervousness yesterday here in the States. Clearly, things in China were in real trouble for them. Talk to me about what we saw yesterday. What was really happening? What were the mechanics of what was going on?
Well, what we saw was a sell-off in the Dow and the S&P and the NASDAQ. And we saw one that was just aggressive enough to make our traders or our financial community concerned. But it really is just a byproduct of two things. One, a reflection of what's been happening in the Chinese market and other elements of the global market. Clearly, China saw an even worse problem. They had an 8.5% sell-off in one day. That's their Black Monday.
Yeah.
That's big. That's big. But other markets were selling off as well, so you saw some of that. But really for us, it's the sell-off that's come about after a few days of negative activity, but after having reached a high in the Dow of well over 18,000 points not long before. To suggest the Dow wasn't overpriced is just a little bit, it's hubris.
I think it was overpriced enough that when people heard the Dow drop, and we're hearing these pre-market drops of 1,000,
right.
And then we went there too.
Yep.
That those numbers that we're used to still being big sort of stick in our head. We're like, oh, it's going down 500 points. Oh my gosh, the world, the whole place is on fire. But that's not the case because the percentage is so much smaller now.
Yeah, the percentage is relatively small. Now the reality is our 52-week sell-off, high to low at the moment, well, as of the close yesterday, is ranging about 11 to 13% based upon whether you're looking at the Dow versus the S&P or the NASDAQ.
Yeah, over 3-4 days, that's a big deal.
Yeah, or even 3 or 4 weeks. That's a sell-off. That's a correction of some significance if it's only a correction.
Right. Okay, that word correction really got thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And not only did that one get thrown around a lot, but recovery got thrown around a lot yesterday. Have we recovered that back? We saw this morning it was up pretty steeply at the beginning,
right.
Trading. Is it over?
Oh,
Can I
absolutely
relax?
not. Absolutely not.
Oh,
no, what is over? Here we are. We're sitting on the beach, Joe, and what we know is a wave of undetermined size is coming at us every 7 seconds. What does over mean? I know there's another one coming out. I just don't know what it looks like. So are we at the end of consecutive negative trading sessions? Maybe. Will today be a positive trading session for the major markets? Maybe. But that doesn't mean that the problems that put these major markets domestically or internationally in the position they're in, that doesn't mean that has passed.
Okay.
We have some issues. China has some issues.
China has some different issues in that their market is completely controlled by their government, right?
Well, not completely. Largely. Yeah, and what we saw happen within the Chinese markets, their currency market recently, here a couple of weeks ago when they revalued the yuan one day by 2%, the next day by 1.6%, and revalue means devalued, okay? Right. So they certainly weren't increasing its value. That's a reflection of them trying to thwart some of the endogenous economic problems that they're facing.
They were a little late to the game on this though, weren't they?
Well, you might be able to say that, but what the game that they're late to is realizing that they are having to control through market-based activity rather than simple fiat and command. That's the game they're probably late to.
So when we talk about their GDP, it's a little different than when we talk about ours. Back in 2008 when we went into a recession, we knew we were heading there because our GDP was in the negative territory 2 consecutive quarters, right?
Right, that's the technical definition.
For them, just being well below where they were is enough to maybe call it a recession. Is that true?
I think we would look at it that way. To most of us walking around on the street, a recession's an economic slowdown, right? Mm-hmm. To the guy who just lost his job, he doesn't care whether it was negative GDP or positive GDP. He cares whether he lost his job. In China, where their GDP increases each year have so often been ranging around the 8 to 10% or more level of gains, what we really see is their economic slowdown maybe at 6%. maybe it's 5% increases. I'm not saying that those are currently reported numbers. What I would suggest is that we look at GDP very differently here in this country than in China, in part because our numbers are really relatively accurate. We have relative transparency for all the ballyhoo of not being transparent enough on our economy. We're one of the most transparent economies in the globe.
Right.
And so for China, we don't know exactly what their GDP is. Worse, we don't know what their GDP per capita is. And so when it backs off even to the 8 or 7% level, that kind of is a Chinese recession, if you will. I'm using some very loose terms here, but it's a slowdown and it affects people's jobs.
You brought up an interesting little thought there, and that was the per capita GDP. We run the world on that one.
Oh, hands down.
Our per capita GDP, because of the private sector, because of all of our small business, that's where the real value is. That's our fundamental value, right?
Yes.
This is where we kick everybody's butt.
Yeah, Adam Smith, hundreds of years ago, said that the wealth of nations were its people. Well, he wasn't wrong. So you can't just look at the GDP of a national system in its whole. I mean, we're still the top national system for GDP. China is a closing second, but in GDP per capita, per person, there's no comparison still.
Is this where our saving grace is when something like this happens, when the world starts to fall apart around us? We rely on the fact that we're strong on our own?
Well, we're not only strong on our own, but we have enough resiliency because of that strength that we can weather problems and come back, yes, with maybe significant government interference. Clearly, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, etc.
Some stop gaps, some things that save us like they did yesterday a little bit, right?
Sure. Well, and moreover, as they saved us from 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, etc., right? So we have those tools in place, but we're very resilient because we start from a position of relative strength. Well, many economies don't start from a position of relative strength. They aren't used to having market resiliency, so they have to have command resiliency. At a point, that command resiliency becomes less and less functional. That's part of what the Chinese are seeing, I believe.
You can only influence things artificially so much.
Right. You can't be part of the capital markets or capitalist market system and be completely dependent upon federal fiat. I mean, those two things don't work at the same time.
All right, we have just a moment left, so let's talk about what we should do now. As an individual, what's my plan? Stay the course? Is that it?
Yeah, well,
that's what I was telling people yesterday. I hope I'm right.
Certainly at this point. I mean, if you were prescient enough to say, I'm going to be the financial guru, you ought to have sold when the Dow was over 18,000, right?
Yeah.
But now
hopefully you bought a lot yesterday.
And hopefully you bought a lot yesterday. Maybe you were afraid to. Maybe that fear was warranted. Maybe not. We're going to know inside of a few weeks. I mean, we're up sharply this morning, but where are we going? Well, here's what we know. Relax. Now, my concern about this whole thing isn't from what I just said. When I say relax, it's more, there's not a lot you can do about it today. We've already seen some tumble. But what concerns me more than anything else are the number of very, very credible voices saying, oh no, this is nothing to be worried about.
Everybody's like, it's all fine, it's all good.
And when everybody says it's nothing to worry about, my sense is it may be something to be concerned about.
All right, well, we're going to go forward with just a little bit of bated breath, kind of holding it for a little bit and see what happens.
We'll just watch for that next wave to come in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Hopefully it doesn't wash over us. As always,
great
Rick,
to see you.
Great to have you here. And we will be back with more of the Mountain Morning Show. We're wrapping up this hour here talking about the economy, so something to think about during the break. We come back, we got a lot more on the Mountain Morning Show heading your way, including Subway, and we'll be joined by the Park City Police Department for that, and much, much more, all right here on the Mountain Morning Show after these commercial messages.